Welcome everyone! In this video, we are going to be diving into my ultimate tier list for the Great League. It's been a while since I've done one of these tier lists, and with a massive update with Season 15, it is high time we do another one of these because the meta has shifted in a very, very positive direction in my opinion. So, many of you, I'm sure, are very much familiar with how these work, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, we will be ranking a number of Pokemon here, and guys, yeah, I can include the entire Great League, every Pokemon that is eligible. We would be here for hours, so we have a lot and enough to get a good idea of what will be used. If it's not on this list, just it's safe to assume that it is not worth mentioning. So the way these work is we've got the S tier, that is the best of the best, the high watermark in terms of meta in the Great League, and A tier, not far behind, B tier, sort of middle of the road, and C and D are borderline spicy, not generally the most effective. So without further ado, let's kick this thing off, starting with Abomasnow. Man, Abomasnow is a very good grass type, but now there are better ice types in the meta. Still a very good counter to most of the water types in the flyers. I'm going to go ahead and say Abomasnow, solid B tier, ice/grass type in the Great League. And moving on to Altaria. Altaria, my goodness. It sort of floats between S and A tier. My goodness. With the inclusion of all the ice types, I'm going to go ahead and say A tier for Altaria. Could easily be S tier. Last season, I would 100%. There would be no question about it. But for now, it is floating at A tier in my humble opinion in terms of a anti-fighter, dragon/flying type in the Great League. You do have to be a little bit more conscious about your team building with Altaria these days. And moving along to Araquanid. Oh, it floats between B and C tier. I'm going to go ahead and say C tier in terms of a bug/water type. There is a better water bug type that has gotten a lot more relevance, although the bulk on Araquanid cannot be denied. It's just hard to run this thing right now with the steel types, most notably Alolan, Sandslash, Stunfisk. They do give Araquanid a very hard time, but it can put in work up against the psychic types like Medicham and Deoxys. But for now, solid C tier. And Aurorus is a D tier ice type. It is much better suited for the Ultra League, in my opinion. Great League, the meta is just far too hostile toward Aurorus. And then we've got Azu here, good old Azumarill, still a solid B tier water type, a very good anti-fighter as well. Handles Sableye, keeps Sableye in check. About as bulky as it gets. It's a solid B tier Pokemon in the Great League. And the same goes for Bastiodon. Quite polarizing, one of the more polarizing Pokemon in the Great League. There's a lot of talk about this thing being a quote-unquote no-skill Pokemon, which I find to be very interesting. But Bastiodon does its job to perfection. It's probably the best specialist we have in the entire Great League. And its specialty is shutting down the flyers like you wouldn't believe, as well as the charmers and ice types, although a lot of the ice types can now fight back against Bastiodon, limiting its effectiveness up against the ice types, but of course still can hold its own. You just keep it away from those fighters at all costs. So solid B tier. We all know the story with Basti. And Beedrill, super spicy. A very good anti-fighter, but there are just better, more flexible options in Beedrill. Again, the steel types in this meta are very difficult for Beedrill to do what it wants to do. Although it can fight back with Drill Run, it's just really tricky. The bulk is holding it back, I believe, as well as that bug typing. And speaking of bug typing, we make our way to Buzzwole. another D tier Pokemon. It could easily float between C/D tier, but I'm going to go ahead and say B tier just because of that bug typing. With Noctowl is still definitely its presence is still felt in the Great League, and they are just far too prevalent. There are much better fighting type options as well, other than Buzzwole, but still very good. Can do some things. Could easily be C tier as well. And then we make our way to Charizard, most notably Shadow Charizard. That's an A tier flyer, in my opinion. You have to have the right amount of skill, experience, and a good shielding strategy for Shadow Charizard. If you can accomplish that, holy smokes, look out. This thing can lay waste. Although the usage has dropped off quite a bit with the introduction of a lot of the ice types in the meta that can still hit squishy Shadow Charizard for some very meaningful neutral damage, but still A tier nonetheless. And then we make our way to Chestnut here, solid C tier grass/fighting type. Again, the Noctowl presence and flying type presence in general does hold Chestnut back a little bit. But it can still put in work. It can shut down a Stunfisk like you wouldn't believe, as well as a Lantern. Cofagrigus. Oh, man. Oh, where do we put old Cofagrigus here? I'm going to go ahead and say solid C tier. Ghost type. It just gets hard-walled by, of course, we know Noctowl. It can fight back with Dark Pulse, but let's be real. Those Dark Pulses are not all that meaningful, to be honest. But very bulky, a very solid Ghost type overall, solid C tier. And we've got Cresselia, seeing a lot more usage this season. I'm going to go ahead and say Cresselia, man, floats between A and B tier. Oh, man, I'll go ahead and say A tier, but it can easily be B tier as well. We all know the bulk is still very much noticeable in the Great League. It puts in work. I think you absolutely 100% need the Legacy Grass Knot to make Cresselia work. But the reason why is because it is an excellent answer to Medicham. It can put up a fight against Sableye depending on the shielding scenario and has play up against Lantern. So solid A tier at the moment, could easily be B tier as well. Same goes for Defense Form Deoxys, strong A tier, Psychic type, much more of a pseudo fighter, has excellent coverage. Deoxys stock has never been higher. With the introduction of all of the ice types in the meta, has play up against Noctowl, and as well as having play up against some very strong water types as well with Thunderbolt. Strong A tier in Deoxys. And then we make our way to good old Dugong. Dugong is S tier 100%, guys. Holy smokes, Dugong. Shot right up off of the fringes of the Great League, right on up to the top. It is S tier. There's no doubt about that. The bulk cannot be denied, as well as the coverage that it now has with Season 15 of Pokemon Go Battle League Drill Run. Made this thing a power player in the Great League. It is S tier for sure. And we make our way to Diggersby. In terms of the open Great League, oh man, it floats between B and C tier. Oh, it's so tough. I'm going to say C tier just because of all of the ice types that are now injected into the meta. If we can give Diggersby some solid coverage coming in the form of perhaps Body Slam or Rock Slide, as I proposed in my Season 15 wish list, that might change. But for now, it's just seen better days. It's hard. It's still a nightmare to team build for, as it did not get any updates for Season 15. But look out, in those specialty cups, it can put in the work. Such a shame as well, because its stat product is amazing. It just needs that one little bit of coverage in terms of its second charge move to really put it over the edge. And then we make our way to Shadow Dragonair. Man, Shadow Dragonair again, solid C tier. Last season, it was floating between A and B tier, but the ice types just kind of halted that train quite considerably, I will say. The usage has dropped off tremendously. Unfortunate, as Shadow Dragonair puts in work up against Noctowl and Lantern. It's just all of the ice types, I think, have been deterring Shadow Dragonair. And then we make our way to Dubwool. Double, solid, I'll go ahead and say, I'm gonna say C tier, just because Deoxys and Medicham are all over the place. Double has a place in the meta. It's just very limited, unfortunately. But again, can still put in work in the specialty cups. And then we've got Frostlass here. Frostlass, very good, very underrated and underutilized, I will say. It floats between A and B tier. I'm going to go ahead and say B tier just because of the steel types. Steel types give Frostlass a lot of trouble in the Open Great League, as well as Lantern. Lantern deters Frostlass quite a bit, as well as the increased usage of Sableye in response to Medicham and Deoxys. So Frostlass, still very good, solid B tier. Galvantula, my goodness, C tier for sure. It's just really frail. That's just it. It's just frail. It's hard to run. G-Fisk is all over the place. Basti is still all over the place. Galvantula, even up against the Flyers like Noctowl and Altaria, they can still put up a fight up against Galvantula. So solid C tier, electric / bug type. And then we've got Gliscor, again getting pushed down a notch. Last season I would have easily had it at right around B tier, but the ice types are deterring Gliscor usage quite a bit, as it does melt away with ice type damage. Shadow Golbat, very strong, B tier, got a little bit of a buff with the Poison Fang update with Season 15. And it's a pretty solid answer to Pokemon like Medicham, who take super effective damage from the wing attacks. So Golbat, solid B tier flyer, I would say. Guzzlord, D tier for sure. I think you just go with Zweilous. And speaking of Zweilous, not even on the list. How the heck did Guzzlord get on the list than Zweilous? But Zweilous is just a better option, and that's pushing it as well as Zweilous, much like Dragonair was very good last season, but the ice types are quite a bit for Zweilous to handle, as well as the steel types. And then we've got Jumpluff, solid C tier, grass / flying type, very bulky, very spammy. It's just, again, the ice. That's a running theme. Holy smokes, the ice types are ruling the roost this season for sure, and I'm not mad at it one bit. And then we come to Como-O, again, better dragon options, better fighting type options, but perhaps for a specialty type cup. And then we've got Lantern here, no doubt about it, S tier, 100%, one of the better generalists in the entire meta, still going strong. And it's even stronger now with the drop-off in usage in terms of grass types, although people are now catching on and beginning to run those grass types. They are building around that ice-type weakness, and but still, that just goes to show Lantern still going strong. And Lickitung back on the map in Season 15, A tier for sure. Probably top 5 in terms of safe swaps. It's now back on the map. Noctowl is still very much present in the meta, just not nearly as much as last season, which gives Lickitung a lot more play. It's easy top 5 in terms of safe swaps in the Great League, 100%. And we've got Lurantis is a D tier grass type, in my humble opinion. The stat product is just holding it back a little bit. Leafage, I had higher hopes for Leafage. I was really hoping it was a Shadow Claw clone, but it ended up being a Bullet Punch clone, which does not do Lurantis any favors whatsoever, unfortunately. And then we've got Shadow Machamp. Was really picking up steam last season, but as of now, there are just better fighting type options to use. Although it could easily be C tier. I think a lot of people are just really afraid of running Machamp because Medicham and Deoxys usage is through the roof these days. And then we've got Mandibuzz, again, a D tier flyer. I think if you want to run something like a Mandibuzz, you just run Noctowl. It double resists ghost type damage and has better charge moves. But if you give Mandibuzz Sky Attack or Brave Bird, which it can learn, then we'll have to revisit that. But Aerial Ace is just not good. That is what's really holding Mandibuzz back. And then we've got Mantine here. I think the bulk, I don't think that is enough to justify putting it ahead of Pelipper, which is the other more prominent water flying type. It's sort of a one-trick pony. It doesn't really, it's bulky, but Bubble Beam as its fast activating charge move, and it has Aerial Ace. I just think it needs better coverage overall. Same goes for Alolan Marowak. D tier ghost type Sableye usage is just off the charts, and now even the ice types can fight back, and most of the ice types are ice water types, which means that Alolan Marowak can only do neutral damage to them, and they can fight back with the threat of Drill Run. So Alolan Marowak not as good as it has been in seasons past. And then we've got Medicham. Oh my goodness, I wonder where will Medicham go on this tier list. It's S tier. I think we all know why. We don't even need to expound upon that. Medicham about as overpowered as it gets. Not broken, just very, very strong. One of my favorite Pokemon for sure. S tier 100%. And then we've got Meganium. Meganium is a solid C/B tier. I just think that not having the flying type coverage, which not every Pokemon needs to be able to cover what it's weak against, but we do find that Pokemon that can do that tend to be higher, have more value overall. But Meganium, very bulky, very strong Pokemon. It's just not the best grass type to use, I would say. One of them, it's up there. I think you'd just go with Venusaur, though, overall, in the place of Meganium. But still very good, very strong. And then we've got Shadow A9 here. Still A tier. It has seen better days. It was right around S tier last season. Could even be B tier this season, but I'll give it the respect of A tier. It's still the best charmer you can run in the league. Still one of the better Powder Snow users as well. A9 solid, A9 solid A tier for sure. K9, on the other hand, in terms of a fire type, it's strong C tier. I think you just use Charizard if you want that type of coverage, although K9 does have its place as well. But yeah, it's still very, very much C tier for sure. And then Noctowl, S tier. I don't think there's any question about that. It is still very strong, even with the inclusion of the ice types to bring this thing back down to earth a little bit. It is still very much strong and S tier 100%. And we've got Obstagoon here. It floats between B and C tier, but I'm going to go ahead and say B tier just because it keeps Sableye in check. Has decent steel type coverage as well. Obstagoon very much underutilized in the Great League, I would say. And we've got Pelipper here, solid B tier flyer, I would say. Very good water type coverage, very good anti-fighter. It's just the usage of Lantern really, I think, puts people on edge a little bit with running Pelipper, but still very strong nonetheless. And we've got Pidgeot. I think that's the Mega. Holy smokes. Is that the Mega, guys? It looks like the Mega, but it's still C tier nonetheless. If I'm going to go with a flying normal type in the Open Great League, I'm not even thinking twice about it. It's Noctowl all day. And then we make our way to Politoed. I'm going to say D tier. There are just better water types to use, but there are rumors of it having a community day sometime soon here, so we will see what happens with the two Polys, and I'm just going to stick Poliwrath here as well. I put those in the same conversation, sort of. We'll see about that when they get their community days, but for now, they're just better water types to use. Let's be honest, guys. If I need water coverage, I'm thinking Lantern, I'm thinking Pelipper, Azumarill. They're just better water type options. And then we've got Registeel here. Man, Registeel sort of floats between S and A tier. I'm going to go ahead and say A tier. It is the second best steel type in the meta, in my opinion. Very bulky. We all know what's up with Reggie. But in season past, before the nerf, it would be S tier without a doubt, but still very good nonetheless. Strong A tier steel type for sure. Runerigus, it's not happening for Runerigus this season. It just Noctowl and Lantern are just far too prevalent for it to do anything. And then you've got the counters to it coming in the form of Sableye, which we make our way to. Sableye's A tier, 100%, still the best safe swap in the game. Could easily be S tier as well, but Noctowl knocks it down a notch. Again, one of the better generalists as well, which is why it's a very good safe swap option. Not as many Charmers, so Sableye still very strong in the meta. A tier for sure. And then we've got Scrafty here, B tier for sure. They're just better fighting type options, most notably Medicham. Although Scrafty does keep the ghost types in check, has strong neutral matchups across the board. It's just Noctowl, Medicham, Deoxys. Those all make it quite difficult for Scrafty to shine. And then we've got Skarmory here. Skarmory's a C tier flying type. They need to do something with Air Slash. Once that happens, I proposed a buff for Air Slash, but it needs help in that department. That is what's holding it back, and it's a shame because it has a very good stat product. There are just better flying type options to go with. And we've got Steelix here. Steelix is a D tier steel/ground type. It does very well in the specialty cups. It's just the moveset on it is very awkward. It runs Dragon Tail, so it has no play up against other steel type options, and then Earthquake takes forever and a day to get to. Very good for the specialty cups. Just struggles in open for sure. And then we've got Stunfisk, S tier, 100%. Stunfisk, a staple of the Open Great League. We all know by now Stunfisk, S tier for sure. And then we've got Shadow Swampert, strong A tier Pokemon, 100%. Very spammy. It's just the ice types again. A lot of the ice types thoroughly do quite well up against Swampert. And if it's not a Shadow, it's going to be struggling up against Noctowl, but still very strong. Has that very broken 4-cycle, which is why it's still relevant, to be honest, in the Great League. And then we've got Tapu Fini. Very interesting. Man, I'm going to go ahead and say it's just the ice types with the ground coverage. I'll give it the respect of B tier. Very similar to Azumarill. They have very similar coverages. Azumarill a lot more bulky, although Tapu Fini can apply more fast move pressure. So they're very similar in their roles. And then we've got Toxapex. Toxapex is the best poison type in the meta. About as bulky as it gets. It's an A tier Pokemon. It's thoroughly underutilized. It should be used a lot more, as it does beat Noctowl, beats Medicham, has a very strong play up against Deoxys. Even a Lantern, if you happen to catch a Water Gun Lantern, Toxapex thoroughly dominates it. Very strong Pokemon overall. And we've got Toxicroak. Toxicroak did get a buff, but that stat product is definitely holding it back. Again, if I had my choice of a fighter, I'm just choosing Medicham 10 times out of 10, no doubt about it. I would even consider Deoxys or Scrafty before I considered Toxicroak. And then we've got Trevenant. It was nerfed, but still solid B tier overall. It could even be knocked down to C tier. Making it 6 Shadow Claws for Seed Bomb was thoroughly unnecessary, unwarranted. That did not need to happen. I don't know why they did that. I hope they backtrack on that for next season and come to their senses. There was no reason to nerf Trevenant like that. That just made Medicham and Deoxys much stronger in the meta. So yeah, but it can still put in work. Still does its job, just not as effectively as it once did. And then we've got Tropius. That's a D tier Pokemon. Again, any Pokemon with Aerial Ace is not going to be top tier, guys. let alone Air Slash and Aerial Ace. Forget about it. It either needs a better coverage move or a buff to Air Slash to see some relevance in the open meta. But again, with the ice types, I'm not sure if that would even help it, so we'll see. And then we've got Umbreon. Umbreon floats between S and A tier. I'm going to go ahead and say A tier. About as tanky as it gets, much like Toxapex. This thing is amazing. So powerful, it can even force shields on Medicham, dominates Deoxys, has strong play up against Umbreon. Again, much like Lantern, one of the better generalists in the entire meta. Very strong Pokemon. And then we've got Venusaur. Venusaur is a strong A/B tier grass type. Again, anything with Frenzy Plant is going to be absolutely be able to do something. And I just realized I forgot about Shadow Vic. Shadow Vic would be right there with Venusaur and Trevenant in terms of B tier grass types. Just pretend that Shadow Vic is here on the B tier, as I just realized. And then we've got Vigoroth here. Vigoroth, C tier, it needs help. It needs a buff to Bulldoze. That is what it's truly needed for it. I proposed making Bulldoze a Scald clone. I think that would really do Vigoroth some favors, as well as some other Pokemon that also have access to Bulldoze. And speaking of, Walrein is one of those Pokemon. Walrein, strong B/A tier ice type. It's not used nearly as much as Dugong, and I'm not sure why. It does... It is a little bit more dynamic than Dugong. They both do very similar things. I think the bulk on Dugong just gives it the edge in most team building options, but it's still strong. It still did get a buff. I used it early on, and it is very much improved with the Icicle Spear buff, 100%. And then we've got Whiscash. It's a C tier ground type. I think if I had my choice, I'm going Quagsire 10 times out of 10, guys. There's just no doubt about that. I should have gotten Icy Wind as I proposed with my wish list, but it did not, so it's going to struggle, even with the Mud Bomb buff. Still very much a specialty cup Pokemon. And speaking of, the same goes for Drifblim. Almost D tier, guys. My goodness. Although I'm gonna put it on the C tier. Just because with Mystical Fire, it now has much stronger play up against Galarian, Stunfisk, and Registeel, as well as still being a ghost type that can keep Medicham and Deoxys in check. There are just a lot of Sableyes running rampant, guys, and a lot of ice types. So Drifblim, solid C tier for sure. And then we've got Haxorus. I hope this isn't recency bias, but I'm going to go ahead and say B tier. Probably the best dragon behind Altaria. And that's crazy to think about, but my goodness, as squishy as it is, that compounding effect of Breaking Swipe combined with its high attack, my goodness, that thing can put in work for sure. Crazy to say this and think about, but probably the best, second best dragon type, which I never thought I'd be hearing myself say. And then we've got Jellicent here, solid B tier ghost / water type. Very strong. It's just Registeel, Registeel and Lantern are what's holding Jellicent back, as well as Noctowl, but still very, very solid ghost / water type overall. And then we've got Shadow Nidoqueen. Oh man, it floats between B and C tier. I'll give it the respect of B tier. It's still decent. I just think with Poison Jab, it really needs to be on a 5 cycle for Poison Fang, which is unfortunate because that 5 cycle on the Shadow is, I gotta say, it is broken, but they tried to compensate by upping the damage. It's still nice, but I think it needs Shadow Claw. That's what I proposed on my wish list. I still want to see that happen for Nidoqueen. If we were to give it Shadow Claw, which it can learn, look out. We might be looking at something different, but for now, solid B tier. And Quagsire Shadow, particularly, that's going to be floating between A and B tier. I will go ahead and say A tier just because it's very strong overall in the meta. With all the steel types, the lanterns, this thing as a shadow, I'm noting as a shadow, puts in the work for sure. And has coverage up against the flyers with Stone Edge. Quagsire, amazing. And we've got Alolan Sandslash, almost S tier, not quite there. I'm going to go ahead and say A tier for Shadow Alolan Sandslash. That thing absolutely puts in the work. Having Drill Run was an absolute game changer for this thing. I proposed a buff to Bulldoze to buff this thing, but giving it Drill Run, that's fine too. I'll take that all day. A tier for sure. And then we've got Ariados. Here is B tier. I think we all understand why. Much for the same reasons as Beedrill. Just a lot of rock and steel types that hold this thing back. And then we've got Credeli here. Credeli strong, almost A tier, but I'm going to go ahead and say B tier. This thing breaks up the Noctowl Lantern core a little bit. It's just Medicham and Deoxys are still a thing, as well as the ice types, most notably Alolan Sandslash, which deter that usage a little bit. And we've got Shadow Dragonite. My goodness, it was a force to be reckoned with last season, but those ice types have blown it completely off the map, down to the fringes of the meta. I have not seen very many this season. And we've got Dunsparce. Amazing. The buff came in clutch for Dunsparce. It's an A tier, normal type for sure. One of probably the strongest core breaker in the entire meta, guys. My goodness, this thing handles so many Pokemon, core breaks so many teams, and buffing rollout seemed to be a big improvement for it. That thing is, I need to run this thing again, but thank goodness we are still early on. I have not yet run it again, but I will. Keep an eye out for that. Has amazing coverage. Anything with rock and ground type coverage is going to be very good. Look at Stunfisk. Look at a lot of other Pokemon that have that. Dunsparce, very strong core breaker. Probably the best core breaker in the entire league. And then we've got Golisopod here. Man, as much as I love this thing, I've got to keep my biases out of this here. We're calling it down the line here. Golisopod, strong B tier Pokemon, and that is saying a lot because before this season it was completely irrelevant, an afterthought. But it is very strong with Shadow Claw. Can deal strong neutral damage to just about everything in the entire meta. This thing puts in the work. Very strong Pokemon, very much improved. And Clefable, very strong as well. I'm going to go ahead and say B tier. Fairy Wind on that thing made it an amazing closer in the Great League. If you guys have not seen my coverage on Clefable, definitely check it out. That thing can put in work with the right strategy as a closer. And we've got Drapion here. Very strong Pokemon overall. It's solid B tier for sure. It's just a lot of ground type coverage has been injected into the meta, which sort of deters Drapion usage a little bit, but it should be used a lot more. It can keep Deoxys in check, can keep Cresselia in check, so people need to realize that they can use their Drapion, they just have to have the adequate coverage. I might run it myself just to show you guys what's up. And last but certainly not least, we've got Unova Stunfisk, solid C tier, guys. I mean, if I'm going with a Mud Bomb user, I'm choosing Quagsire 100%, and if I need an electric type, I'm choosing Lantern. That's just how it is. But the bulk cannot be denied. It's very strong, and the specialty cups. And that about wraps it up, guys. I didn't want this thing to be too long, and we're rolling at about 30 minutes or so. That's about where I thought we would be. So not to drag this thing out, I hope you guys all agree. There probably could have been more in the S tier. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. But that about wraps it up for my ultimate tier list for the Great League. I always love doing these things. And guys, I had a blast. I hope you all enjoyed. As always, I thank you for watching and keep up the grind. Thank you, guys.